Welcome to Ake Festival 2019. My name is Lade Tawak, and I'll be hosting this book chat with Adaobi Nwaubani and Sulaiman Addonia. Adaobi is an award-winning Nigerian novelist, essayist, and journalist. Her debut novel, I Did Not Come to You by Chance, won the 2010 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book, amongst other awards. And her debut young adult novel, Buried Beneath the Baobab Tree, which we'll be discussing today, which is based on interviews with girls kidnapped by Boko Haram, was published last year by HarperCollins. Her journalism focuses on underreported humanitarian issues, and her essays have appeared in various publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, and The Guardian. Sulaiman Addonia is a Brussels-based novelist who fled Eritrea as a refugee in childhood. He spent his early life in a refugee camp before moving to Saudi Arabia as a journalist. Before moving to Saudi Arabia as a teenager. He later moved to London as an underage, unaccompanied refugee and went on to earn a BSc in economics from UCL and an MA in development studies from SOS. His book, The Consequences of Love, was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize and translated into more than 20 languages. And his second book, which we'll be discussing today, Silence is My Mother Tongue, has been longlisted for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. So before we start the conversation, I'll ask them to read from their books.
The title of this very short chapter, all the chapters are very short, is Koboko. Malam Zwindila scratches the date into the right-hand corner of the blackboard with a tiny piece of chalk. Mistakenly, he writes Monday instead of Tuesday. With a handful of fresh green leaves from the pile on the teacher's desk, he wipes the wrong date off and writes the correct one. Then he turns to the right-hand side of the classroom where the boys sit. "You, what is democracy?" he asks. Danladi, son of the village headhunter, rises to his feet. "Sir, democracy is... Malam Zwindila's eyes point elsewhere. "You, what is democracy?" Peter, whose 3 brothers are crippled from polio, gets to his feet. "Sir, democracy is... it is when... You, what is democracy?" Ibrahim, a wizard who can calculate 23 times 73 without pen or calculator, but who doesn't know the difference between there and there, stands to his feet. "Sir, democracy is the government of all types of people." Malam Zwindila tosses the pile of used leaves onto the teacher's desk and grabs his koboko. "Some of you have brains made of sawdust," he says. He runs his other hand from one end of the long, hard whip to the other, slowly. His eyes survey the class. Those 3 boys have just earned 10 strokes of the koboko each, either on their buttocks or their palms, depending on Malam Zwindila's mood. Who is next? It is difficult to believe that this man inflicting terror is the same man who stood on the altar in Christ the King Church 9 months ago, watery-eyed as his lithe bride walked up the aisle. But I'm not afraid. I remember everything Malam Zwindila taught us in the last class and the one before that and in every other one before. He turns towards the girl's side. He's about to point his eyes at Sarah when I stretch my hand high up in the air. "Sir? Yes." Back at home, Papa and my brother sit in the living room and talk about the news on the radio, while Mama and I sit in the corridor or in the kitchen. Back at home, Mama must keep quiet whenever Papa speaks, and I must never question anything he says. Back at home, the men and boys know everything, but here in school, I know more than all the boys. Salt may laugh at shea butter when the sun shines, but when the rain falls, it must hide its head. "Sir, democracy is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people, I say." Malam Zwindila keeps his eyes on me. He doesn't waver, he doesn't flutter, he doesn't utter a word. He slams his koboko whip down on the teacher's table, hard and quick. My heart jumps. "Clap for her," he yells. The whole class claps, keeps clapping, and continues clapping. Thank you.
Am I allowed to ask one of these lovely people to read on my behalf? I have to read. Can I ask one of them? No? I have to read. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Right. So this section is from a chapter called The White Cloth. Saba arrived in the area north of the camp. Haj Ali's daughter pastured their animals on the grass of the hill. His wife stirred a pot over a stove with one hand while shaking a goatskin bag tied between two logs with the other. Her eyes were half closed, as if in deep contemplation. The smell of butter hung in the air. Saba greeted the woman with narrow eyes, the woman whose own husband has described to her mother as empty of love. The woman, though, stood up and hugged Saba, pouring into her ears words that had aged with the milk she fermented with her travels. Love, my daughter, is the cradle in which our wisdom churns. As Saba was about to leave with 3 eggs and a spoonful of butter that she paid for with her earnings at EOPS, Haj Ali held her hand. And tell, he said, and tell the idle businessman I will come soon to see him. She nodded, freeing her fingers from his grasp. I'm not sure a husband like him is capable of doing anything except taking evening walks, said the nomad, laughing. That's not what a young woman needs. Saba turned to look at his wife, who had again closed her eyes, returning to her daydream as her hands worked, rocking side to side, as if she was cradling her lonely heart. Evening, full moon, twinkling stars, music bellowed from a small radio outside Zayab's bar. Saba sat behind the shrub and peered through its leaves. The drinkers sat under a hanging oil lamp. Tedros started another jar of tej against the pleas of Azayab. You are going to kill yourself, said the barwoman. Stop. Leave him, said the praise poet. His father asked him not to be his best man at his wedding to Saba, his sweetheart. How cruel, said the athlete. Father, no, children can't say no to them. Tedros took a piece of white cloth from his shirt pocket. Saba bowed, and she thought of the night to come in a few days when Tedros would pass this white cloth to his father before they enter their marital bedroom, a test of the bride's virtue. Saba wondered if she had enough blood left inside her to mark the white cloth. Forget Saba, the athlete said to Tedros. Go to Miriam. I heard, my dear gentleman, that since her divorce, she's been giving it away for free. We call her the Ed Center, said the praise poet, laughing. I think she married that man so she could get it over with, said the athlete. Now she no longer has the virginity to God. She can live as she always wanted. Actually, said the praise poet, her husband said she came to him spoiled. How does he know? Azayab asked. Well, said the praise poet, the poor man couldn't draw blood out of her. Why are men so obsessed with a woman's blood? Said Azayab. Not all women bleed the first time. I didn't, nor did my sister or my cousin. Girls' livelihoods are being destroyed because of your failure to understand. A woman is too complex for a man, said Jamal. That's why we reduce her to simple matters. No, said Azayab. It shows how much violence there is against women if even love has to be equated with drawing blood from a woman. Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question is for both of you. The book is based on stories of real people, and your book is set in the refugee camp, which you have lived in. Why did you choose to tell these stories as fiction and not nonfiction?
Well, most people are aware of the kidnapping of the Chibok girls in 2014. That made international headlines. And as a journalist, I mean, I'm a journalist, so most of the stories I write are nonfiction anyway. So I got to, between 2014 and now, I've interviewed dozens of girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And many of the girls I found out were kidnapped even a year before the Chibok girls were kidnapped. Most of the girls I've interviewed. So the kidnapping, thousands of girls were kidnapped even before the world got to know about the kidnappings because of the Chibok girls. So the more I heard these girls' stories, the more I listened to them. Of course, I churned out lots of stories for the media, mostly the international media, real stories. But even people who were close to me, you know, not everybody reads the news. Not everybody goes beyond the headlines, because most of the headlines we read, girls raped by Boko Haram, girls forced to marry, this, that, Christian girls forced to convert to Islam. You know, those were just the general headlines. And of course, once the stories disappear from the headlines, most people forget about them. And again, people tend to become jaded. I mean, even you read one Boko Haram story, you read the second one, you read the third one, you don't want to read much about it anymore. So what I wanted to do was, with fiction, I was able to tell the variety of stories I had been hearing. The average person you ask about girls kidnapped by Boko Haram, you hear of girls who were raped, you hear of girls who were forcefully married off to men they were interested in getting married to. But I have interviewed women who told me they were very happy to be married off. Some women told me they did not want to return to their families after they were kidnapped. Some women told me, even some of the Chibok girls told me that when they were kidnapped and taken into the forest and some of their classmates got married, that some of their classmates, the classmates who were married, started to treat the rest like slaves. These were girls who were kidnapped together. So there was a variety of stories I was hearing. And I wanted to put everything together in one, you know, in a book, in one project, represent, of course, I mean, I didn't want to tell one girl's story. And I didn't want to focus just on the Chibok girls, because the whole world has focused on those girls and ignored the thousands of others who were kidnapped. I mean, the Nigerian government, for example, paid 3 million euros or thereabouts to have just 100 and something, 80 and 20 something of the girls rescued. Meanwhile, there are thousands of girls who've been kidnapped and they have no medication, they have no education, but so much money is used to pay ransom for the Chibok girls. I didn't want it to be just about them. So I wanted to write the story of every single girl who's been kidnapped. And that's why my main character doesn't have a name. I don't name her because I want her to represent each of the girls. And that's another reason why when I hear people say the Nigerian government has done nothing to rescue girls kidnapped by Boko Haram, I think it's very unfair. Because yes, more than 200 Chibok girls were kidnapped, only 100 and some, okay, we still have over 100 in captivity. We still have that number. The Nigerian government has just brought about 106 or 108 back. But there are thousands of girls I've met who were freed by the Nigerian military. Thousands. So when we say the government has done nothing because 100 and something Chibok girls are not back, it means that we disregard the rescue of the thousands of girls. So that's what I wanted to do with my book, to draw a bit of their attention away from, not really take away attention from Chibok, to tell the bigger story. It's not just these over 200 girls that the world is fixated on. It's the thousands of girls whose lives were irreversibly disrupted by Boko Haram. So that's the story I've told, taking all the nonfiction, all the interviews I've heard, the variety of characters I've met, and put it all in one book.
I think I have a boring answer. I'm just, I'm a novelist. I like to use my imagination. I like to live with characters. I like to dream. I like to open myself, my body, my mind, my heart to all these characters and to live within me. So it never occurred to me why I shouldn't do this as a nonfiction, because ultimately I'm a novelist, I guess.
Okay, that leads me to my next question for you, which is, how many of the things that you write about in the book are things that you saw or experienced while in a refugee camp?
Maybe many, maybe none. I have no idea, because I was actually talking to someone about what does it actually mean to say this novel is autobiographical, you know? What does it mean to say this is a fiction of work? I mean, ultimately, I always believe that we human beings are made of, you know, we have a lot of illusion in us, right? And we have we accumulate experiences as we go along, you know. And I think you see things, and it's like just the section I read, and things churn inside your head, you know. And things, of course, I've experienced. I mean, I always say the settings I work with are always there, you know. I'm a realist in that sense. It's just that, you know, so I can't really identify which one of the section is really real and which isn't. And I think for me, sometimes I get to the point where, you know, especially with this book, I spent 10 years writing, I got to the point where I didn't know if I myself was real or not, you know?
Thank you. So I'm going to follow up with 2 questions based on your answer to the first one. The first one is, you've heard tons of stories. How did you choose what to keep in the book and what to leave out?
You know, I wanted to represent a variety of characters. The girls who, you know, I just chose, like, reading my book, you see a variety of characters. Each girl's response to the captivity was different. The girls, of course, are living normal lives, well, as normal as it can be in that part of the world, northeast Nigeria, remote areas, rural. So they're living normal lives that are disrupted suddenly. And each girl I've interviewed, or many girls, respond differently. No responses are the same. You know, you don't assume that every girl who was kidnapped is traumatized. Every girl who was kidnapped is suffering from Stockholm syndrome. Every girl who was kidnapped is, you know, was raped. No, I wanted to show a variety of characters, a variety of experiences. So what I did was to use each character to represent as many experiences. You know, like I have girls who were delighted to be married. I have Muslim girls, because a lot of people assume that it's all, Boko Haram is about kidnapping Christians and forcefully converting them to Islam, and, you know, but they're kidnapping Muslim girls as well. They're raping Muslim girls as well. You know, so I just wanted a variety of characters. I just choose characters that will represent a variety of stories. So I have, all my characters are younger than 14 years old, but some were married, like the Muslim girl was married before she was kidnapped. And, you know, I just chose different characters to show the different responses, reactions. We have those who are brainwashed. We have those who can't wait to get out of captivity. So just a range of characters to show the different experiences I encountered while speaking with the girls.
Is there any story or anything that you wanted to include but you weren't able to for any reason?
I don't think there's anything I didn't include. What I was careful to do was not to make things up, because I usually say that this is journalism masquerading as fiction. You know, if it were fiction, I would have had more liberty to, you know, create things and do things. You know, you have a girl snatching a gun from a Boko Haram man and, you know, killing 2 and running away, escaping with 10 of her friends. That would have been exciting to do. But I wanted to tell exactly, you know, as much as I wanted to stay true to the stories I had been told. So what I did was to make sure, I had to be careful to not make things up. So almost everything you read in this book, I encountered, I heard someone say happened to them. As outlandish as some of them may be. I mean, I heard girls, you know, so that's what I found I struggled to do. I made sure I did not fabricate anything. So that's what I did.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier things about assuming that people had Stockholm syndrome, people didn't want to escape, and so forth. Was there anything, and I know that you have a background in psychology, which is why I'm asking you this, was there anything that surprised you about how people behaved, whether the Boko Haram guys or the people who were kidnapped?
Okay, what I found most surprising initially was the fact that the girls, even the Chibok girls, all the girls I interviewed said that Boko Haram has a official policy of not raping girls. So that, you know, when you read about Boko Haram in the media, you assume they must rape everyone. It's their policy. But their actual policies, they do not rape women. The people who rape are the rogues. It's just like you hear the American military went to Iraq and then some military people, you know, were doing funny things. It's not the policy of the American army or the government to behave, you know, to abuse civilians, but some do that. So most of the girls, yes, of course, I mean, my definition of rape, you know, forcefully marrying a woman is still rape, you know. So the men hardly touched the women until they were married to them. That I found surprising, because, you know, we thought Boko Haram was just grabbing girls and sleeping with them. So the girl said the men that did it in secret It wasn't their policy until you were given the girl as a wife, which really is rape by international definitions. That's also rape, but you know the kind of rape I mean, just grabbing women at pleasure, no. And anytime Abubakar Shekau, the leader of Boko Haram, heard that a man raped a woman or even touched a woman, they will put him in the ground and stone him. The whole camp will gather around, dig a hole, stop the person in the ground, and stone him to death. So that's something you don't hear. We just imagine that they're all raping. So that surprised me, that fact. And then, of course, from the women's end, I was surprised to hear women say things like, well, girls and women. I was having a great time. My husband treated me like a king. These are kidnapped girls. My husband treated me like a king. In fact, when the Nigerian military came to rescue me, if I had a gun, I would have shot the soldiers. And then I meet women who have been rescued by the Nigerian military. And when they hear that Boko Haram has bombed somewhere, they're rejoicing. These are girls that the Nigerian military has risked their life to go and rescue. And those girls are rejoicing that Boko Haram has destroyed something. So, you know, it was just all very difficult to absorb.
Okay, thanks. So my question for you is, in the book, there is really no sense of time. Sabat says a lot about how she doesn't know how long she's been in the camp. Even for the reader, you don't know, like, what year is this happening in? Was that a thing that you did consciously?
Actually, I left my agent because of this concept of time in the book. Because, you know, when you live in a place like a refugee camp, the only thing you have in abundance is time, that it becomes insignificant. So I really didn't want to do a book a week later, 2 years later, 3 years later, because it really doesn't matter if, you know. And so there were this kind of discussion at the time with my agent. And also she was like, no, we need, you know, a Western reader needs kind of like a specific definition of what time means in the novel. Well, I'm very drawn to I'm very faithful to the setting and how, you know, I get inspired by the setting, and all my prose get inspired by the setting. So I was, you know, so I basically say to them, like, we have different definition. And so I went to work on a book by myself for 10 years, and then I found an agent, and this is how it was done. So, you know, the concept of time is really interesting to me because it becomes relevant towards the end of the book, when, you know, when things started to develop in the refugee camp. So yeah, I guess it was conscious because of the setting demands there.
You know why I'll be reluctant to read this? You know, it contains spoilers. You know, my chapters are very short. And, you know, so that's the issue. I don't want, I can pick. Okay, I'll read a chapter that doesn't contain any spoilers. I will read one called, sorry, I'm looking for the chapter called, okay. It's titled One of a Kind. Now this, as I said, I've interviewed dozens of girls. Some of the girls I interviewed were former female Boko Haram members themselves. Some were girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And all the girls I've interviewed, all the women, when I asked them their worst experiences in captivity, there were two things they said. It wasn't violence, it wasn't rape, it wasn't abuse, and any of the things that horrify us. They said, number one, when the Nigerian military was bombing Boko Haram, because when the Nigerian military planes would come to bomb, they didn't know who was a captive and who was Boko Haram. And so a lot of girls lost their lives in the military bomb. So the girls said when they see the planes, even till now, when they see planes going up, it traumatizes them. Some of them start screaming, and, you know, and even the girls that were sent to the American University of Nigeria, the Chibok girls that were freed, there was something the American University was doing, and they released fireworks, and the girls there was a stampede, they went crazy. So that's the worst experience all the girls tell me they had. And then the second one is the hunger. There was constant hunger. Some said they had to eat grass, they had to eat leaves, plants they had never seen before. They were, you know, digging the ground for things and eating that. So even though, of course, the Chibok girls were fed well because they were, you know, global celebrities, so they were fed well, but there was a time when the Nigerian military blocked the routes, the supply routes for Boko Haram. So Boko Haram didn't have access to food. And that's why the girls came out looking really skinny, because they hadn't eaten for months. They didn't have food. So this chapter just describes the hunger. It's just a chapter where my character is describing the kind of hunger she experiences in captivity. It's titled One of a Kind. The hunger in the Sambisa forest is different from the kind that stood with me on the veranda while I eagerly awaited Mama's return from the market. This hunger is unique. It is the kind of hunger that is not satisfied but staying inside your stomach to sizzle your intestines. Soon it migrates to your head and makes you feel as if you are dangling on the brink of a cliff off which you might fall any moment, stopping along the way to siphon all the strength from your muscles and bones. Henceforth, a snail may beat you in a race. It is the kind of hunger that makes you think no other thought but the next meal. Each time the wind flaps the plastic sheets that provide some privacy for the area where you squat into a hole in the ground to obey nature's demands, you sit up, imagining that someone might be approaching with a bucket of food. Each time a guard fiddles with the barrel of his gun while describing his most recent jihad exploit to another guard who is merely a new conscript, you stretch your neck, hoping that an enamel basin of food has indeed been set on the floor. It is the kind of hunger that takes over your body and soul, forcing your eyelids shut and stealing your attention from Malam Adamu's Quranic lessons. The longer he speaks, the faster the surahs go in my ear and make a U-turn right out of the same ear. When we pray to Allah, I summon enough strength to beg him to send me some food. What I want most in the world is a hefty meal, after which I will put my head down on anything, hard or soft, and snooze until the world comes to a happy end. It is the kind of hunger that follows you right into your sleep. It teases you in your nightmares and taunts your appetite with impossible meals. Sometimes the aroma from my dream lingers after I wake, wetting my tongue with a stream of sour saliva. It is a kind of hunger that bars you from caring about anyone else. Your belly is your only sister and friend. When the new batch of girls arrived after 2 days of trekking from their village through the Sambisa to our camp, I did not care about their blistered soles and bruised skin. I did not care about their trance-like stares. I did not care about the girl still wearing remnants of her wedding dress. From the flower and spirogyra patterns painted on their arms and feet with Lade dye, I could tell which of the rest were her close friends and bridesmaids. My only concern was that these girls were here to shorten my ration, that their coming meant more fierce battles around the food basin. And sure enough, the cornmeal has been all the more watery since they arrived. To feed more mouths, the broth must become less solid. Thank you.
So we need a volunteer to read for Sulaiman. Anybody want to volunteer? Okay. Let's go.
Can I ask what section I will?
Okay.
It's very small. So we just count, we're just going to do a bit of love scene.
To the end? Okay. So it's on page 179. I still recall that summer evening inside Cinema Silencioso when a naked Saba crouched on my face. My eye traveled across the long back of this woman I had loved since the first night in the camp. Above her arched neck, the stars glimmered around the moon. The call to the last prayer of the day was being announced via the plastic megaphone. Saba rearranged herself, spreading her map of love over me. "This is our time," she said. "This is my time." I wanted to speak, but I was breathless. Saba caressed my face as I inhaled the scent of her history, the battles she had won and lost, her rage, her frustrated dreams, the violence on her thighs, the rivers of desire inside her womb. She let go. She filled my mouth from her rivers, so warm that as it slid inside me, She filled my mouth from her rivers, so warm that as it slid inside me, through my throat, I felt riches invading me, gushing towards my soul, the white Nile and its waters running between my ribs. The strings of the singer's car, did I say that right? Yeah. Played a mournful song nearby. The forest whistled. That impious breeze of the summer wafted against my cheeks. Like a famished soul, I tried to grasp the warm air. my hands fluttering at my sides. Saba pushed down with her weight, screwing the lock of existence to her being even more. Screwing the lock of my existence to her being even more. North and South finally reunited, Saba erasing the boundaries that have separated us for so long.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, question for both of you. In the books, there's school, like both characters are very smart girls who are doing well in school and have big dreams. And while in the refugee camp for Saba, like she wanted the school open, and school symbolized like a kind of hope for her. And even for our unnamed character, she also was very interested in going to school, and even in the beginning of the book was all about writing the exams to go to school. So why is school such a symbol of hope for the girls?
Can I just start by saying, like, I'd like to redirect my side of the discussion a little bit to talk about the things that really interested me when I was starting to write this book, because I felt like, you know, we, a lot of us, especially we African novelists with background, you know, who live in the West with background, you know, with African heritage, is that we were obsessed with this idea of doing political novels, you know, obsessed with this idea of the epic. While for me, the intimate is really also can be an epic, right? I just wanted us to open our longing, our desires, you know, like I wanted to do something about characters, you know, characters' dreams, frustrations. And so for me, I lived with those characters for 10 years because it was really important that as we talk about the big things, that we don't forget ourselves as well. And that's why, you know, it was very interesting for me to set this novel in a refugee camp, because it was just African, and I really wanted to see how we treat each other. We can talk all the time about the colonial wars, about, you know, the independence war, but every day there is a war that we wage against women, and that's what I've discovered in this book, you know. And it's really important to kind of lock ourselves in that place and just see how we live, see where we want to go. And so for me, the school was just one part of it. I was really interested, for example, what it means to be a woman, you know, what it means to be a man. You know, this concept of femininity or masculinity in both the man and woman interests me a lot, you know. I wanted to see, is it possible, for example, for my characters who live in this society dominated by men, how brave can they be to live their truth, you know? And I think those things are very, very important to me, you know, because sure, I've suffered wars, I've lived in refugee camps without school, but also at the same time, as much as education matters to me, I matter to myself as well, you know? My characters matter to me too, you know? All the simple, small things that we Africans forget are really important that we deal with them, you know? We talk about them, you know? And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of, you know, when I talk about Saba's frustration, for example, with school, it was just part of her frustration. You know, she's a woman who knows, you know, she's so sensual. She knows who she is. You know, she's a woman sitting with her desires. It's all about, as well as Hagos, as well as Jamal, for example, the section that we just read. You know. Yeah, so it's for me, it was really important to talk about all these different elements that I have, as a writer, for example, I have been told to stay away from. You know, my first ever short story I wrote, you know, we were in this workshop, and, you know, I was the only one who was critiqued because I wrote this love story between a 13-year-old boy and a 30 or 40-year-old woman, you know? And suddenly everyone was like, why are you writing these things, you know? So I think it's really important for the next generation who've got maybe crazy imagination in the way I have, that they also feel comfortable in that sphere of what we call African writing, you know? African writing shouldn't be just dominated by a certain narrative, that we all belong in that narrative as well. Thank you.
for me, school and education was important for two major reasons. First of all, I wanted to show, this is a girl living in a village in rural northeastern Nigeria, which is one of the most underdeveloped parts of Nigeria, in fact, in Africa. So I wanted to show her dreaming, and really, what was she going to dream about? A pair of shoes, a husband, those are the regular dreams. Most girls there are talking about marriage, their children, their husbands, that sort of thing. I wanted to, education was necessary to take her beyond that, a dream that was beyond her present. And the second thing education and school did for my story, my plot, was to show why she was different from all the other girls, or most of the other girls I wrote about. Because she's clearly the narrator of she's the protagonist, she's the one telling the story. And her responses to everything they went through were different. So I wanted to give a reason why her responses were different, why she reacted differently, while she was able to analyze, reflect, and without sound education, without being a reader, she read a lot of storybooks, the kind of books she could have access to. I needed to show that her mind was developed to some extent. So when she got into the forest, I needed to have I needed her to have the mental instrument to analyze things the way I needed her to. Because let's face it, I speak with a lot of women and girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And the way we are shocked and horrified by the things that happen to them, not all, to a lot of them, they don't really feel much has happened to them, because they don't have the, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if that aspect of that part of their minds that develops to understand what has happened to you, it's not really there. For some of them, they don't have an idea how large Nigeria is. They've lived in their tiny, remote villages all their lives. It was only when they were rescued by the military and brought to Maiduguri. Maiduguri was like going to Paris for them. And then something else I found interesting, when they were talking to me, they were describing Nigeria as if they were foreigners. They would say, when the military brought us to Nigeria. So they never really saw themselves as part of us. They were living in a different world. But my main character is attending a school where she knows the map of Nigeria. She can see that even though Boko Haram is terrorizing the country, it's just a few states, just 6 states in the corner. So when Boko Haram is telling them, we have taken over the world, she knows it's a lie. Some of the girls may believe, because I met a lot of women who thought Abubakar Shika was ruling the world. He was telling them these things and they believed it. So, a lot of the women felt they were part of something huge. They were taking over the world. He was going after America and all that. And they believe, but when you're educated, it's just stupidity. So I needed a reason why she didn't succumb and why she could analyze, why she could tell the story she has told. And that's why education and schooling was important to my story.
Okay. So my final question before I open it to the audience is, both books deal with a lot of trauma, a lot of traumatic experiences. And you mentioned that you had been sitting with the story for 10 years. So in writing it, while writing it, did it ever get too much or a lot to deal with? And how did you handle that?
If the book got too much, or it did. When I say to people I spent 10 years, actually I wrote every day, and I went through years of sleeping 2-3 hours where I would walk by night, for example, and that's why I think I've developed a relationship outside human beings with nature, for example, to the point that, for example, I came to see a friend in nature, right? And I think one way of doing it, for example, just taking a shower, not drying yourself, is allowing the wind to caress you. And I think allowing the wind to hold you. And I think that was, for me, extremely soothing and very, very important as I was writing the book, because what was happening to me is, what I didn't realize is, as I was writing those characters, actually I was also a page for my characters. They were rewriting me as well. And I think, when you really believe truly that your characters are actually, inside you, and they, writing, on your skin, I think you become, yes, it becomes too much, but you come out of it as a different person. I was talking with a friend yesterday. I think you grow through a book, You know, you become a different person, and I'm totally different. I think with all my traumas, with all my wounds, you know, I've come to accept the fact that because of my life experiences, for example, you know, I can't deny the fact that trauma is in me, and I'm really wounded. But I think what I learned from writers like Virginia Woolf, for example, is going, every time I go to my writing desk, I have this ability to write while I think. You know, I think you develop that, and I think it's a really important technique, especially for a lot of people who've been through traumatic experience as children, and they become writers, is that we have to have heroes who've actually been there, you know, who've done it, even though every word you write, it writes itself anew as if it were a knife. And I think it's really important to develop that relationship with your writing. And so, yes, the trauma was there, but I think for me, it was also about discovering nature as being something where I let go and I submitted myself to the wind, to the breeze, to the air, and I was held. So that was important.
You know, for me, sorry.
Thank you.
For me, you know, as I said, this is journalism masquerading as fiction. So I had interviewed dozens of women at different times, wept with them, laughed with them. And as a journalist, you want the story. You know, you're on a trip to Chibok, for example, and you meet mothers whose daughters are not having, you know, haven't seen their mothers, and they're weeping. I've been involved in different projects. Sometimes I just go with a recorder to write something, and sometimes I go with a camera to film. So there are times when I just want the story, you know, I just want the story, and I'm after the story. There are times you sit and weep with the girls. They tell you their stories, they cry, you cry as well. But ultimately, I'm after the story. I mean, there's one of the Chibok girls, I don't know for those of you who follow the story, she's called Dorcas Yakubu, but Boko Haram call her Maida. Maida is a second name. Now, she's the girl that they usually project in all their videos. Whenever Boko Haram puts girls forward to speak, she's the one they usually use. And I've interviewed her mother a number of times, and there was a particular video that horrified the whole world. I mean, she came out saying she doesn't want to return to her family are infidels, she's happy with Boko Haram and all that. Now, I was involved in a film project and a documentary, and I had to sit with her mother, interviewing her mother, showing her mother that video, and her mother broke down, was weeping, but the camera was rolling. I mean, I felt, you know, I wanted that story. I mean, I'm not being insensitive. It's a story that needed to be told. If, of course, the mother said, I don't want this on camera, that's a different thing, because they have to give you permission. But my point is, there are times you just want to tell the story, and that's all I'm thinking about at that time. Of course, in the process of trying to get the story, you weep sometimes. But having said that, in terms of trauma, I wish I could tell you that the Boko Haram stories are the most horrifying things I've encountered as a journalist in Nigeria. No. I've really encountered worse stories. Remember, we're talking about girls who've been kidnapped by Boko Haram and gone through all the years of trauma. I've interviewed women who are abused by the military in the camps. I mean, these are people that have been released and they're being abused by government officials in the camps. I've interviewed women who are so hungry that they're selling their bodies to the people that the United Nations and all that have put there, the Nigerian staff, to provide food for them. And to get access to this food, they're selling their bodies. I've done stories in Edo State where you have Nigerians, and I don't know what other term for this, if not to call it slave trade, trafficking themselves, relatives, sisters, brothers, across to Europe. I've done all sorts of horrible stories. So I can't just build a tent on one traumatic story and dwell there, because as you read in my biography, most of my work focuses on underreported humanitarian stories. There are just so many horrible stories. And really, once I'm done with the story, I mean, it doesn't live in me. Maybe that's part of the skill that comes to being a journalist. Of course, you feel for the people. They keep calling you sometimes because there's such a connection. They feel you're their best friend now. But it's work. You know, I'm after the story. I feel for them. I weep with them sometimes. But the most important thing is to get the story, get it written, and I moved on to the next project. I don't dwell in the stories that I write.
Thank you. So, the question. Okay, question there.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Sulaiman. My question for you is you said something really poignant about the fact that, you know, our intimacies and our intimate stories are epic in itself, and you would like for us to be able to see more of that. And I wanted to know, I guess, from both a personal and a publishing perspective, why do you think that we're not seeing more of those intimate stories in that kind of way? And do you think it's also a function of just publishing being attracted to only sort of like traumatic stories as the center of the book or the storytelling?
I think the answer to the first part, I think we don't see ourselves, you know. I really honestly believe we've become accustomed by this idea of seeing, you know, the war, the colonial history, this and that, and to the extent that, like, we always are being engaged in an act of independence, you know, of new wars, you know, and we forget ourselves. And I think sometimes I like what I like to do. I see myself as someone, as a painter, you know, staying behind human, you know, and just seeing them and trying to document the little, simple, beautiful things that they live through, you know? It's like Saba, I think the way she's living her life, and I'm like behind her, just following her, and, you know, seeing her, you know, seeing her at night when she's sleeping, during the day when she's working. So all these things for me are important, because sometimes we're so engaged in an act of fight that we forget, we become invisible to ourselves, you know? And I think the second part, I think publishers, you know, are really interested in those stories because they think they can sell them, especially if we, like us who live in the West, want to write, you know, we have a market, a specific market that say those X, Y stories will sell. And for me, I really totally disappeared. I've isolated myself for 10 years because I really didn't care about the market. And I think for me, the most important thing was the characters, to live with them, and they live in me, you know? And I think ultimately after that, good things will happen.
Thank you. Adobe, I have a question for you. Hello. There's a very extractive nature of journalism. And you also did mention the fact that you have to do your work and you have to go. And I wondered if writing this book did any sort of anything emotionally for you in terms of sort of connecting with the story beyond this very extractive nature of journalism?
No, if anything did it for me, it's not the book, because, you know, this is Nigeria. If a CNN journalist comes and does a story and disappears, they're gone, they are done and they're gone. But I live here. So I do these stories, and remember that when you're chasing a story, you're calling people, begging them, trying to schedule appointments, and then you do your story and you pack your bags, have it typed out and published, and you think you're done, the way CNN journalist or BBC journalist comes and goes. But they have your number. When they're broke, they call you. When a child is ill, they call you. When they've read something or they've heard some fake news, they call you to confirm. So you find yourself entangled in this relationship. So my point is that for me, I can't just write the book and forget about it. Half the time, my phone is ringing, Chibok parents are calling me. Or somebody I met in a refugee camp, he needs 2,000 naira, 5 of his children are sick. You know, it's a world, you get entangled in that world. I mean, it's a different, I don't know where to look to get experience in how to deal with it, because it's something we experience in this part of the world mostly. I mean, I can't ask an American journalist or British journalist because their ethics even forbid things like buying a bag of rice for somebody. But sometimes you interview somebody and you really can't walk out of that house without, you see the child in a bad condition. You really can't walk out without doing something. So my point, I get entangled in their lives without meaning to. You know, they're constantly calling you, more things are happening. And I think that's why over the past few years, I've developed a reputation as the journalist with the most experience in terms of the insurgent story, Chibok and all that, because I'm so entangled in the lives of these people. They call you when anything happened. They went to see the governor did not let them come in. They call you. One of the children, there's something always happening. So that way I always have a story to, an exclusive. So that's the way it is. In this environment, it's difficult to just disconnect. I wish I could, because sometimes I've gone and I've really gone, but they just won't let you go. It happens to me. I go to Edo State, interview women who were trafficked, the same thing. They just will not let you go. Once you're dealing with people who are in desperate need and who've told you traumatic stories. So I really wish I could write my book and it's the end, but it really never ends.
Hi, guys. maybe I'll stand. Thanks for being here. My name is Goga Clay. And shameless plug, I self-published a book that's out there. It's called Destiny Betrayed Us. Y'all check it out. My question is for you, Adaobi. Big fan. I'm sorry I came a little bit late, so I may have missed this. Forgive me if it was already discussed. But in the last section you read, if I understood it correctly, you alluded to, or the character alluded to, a bride that may have been taken during a wedding. There's also a movie that's recent, and in it, Boko Haram sacks a village during a wedding, and then they take them as brides. Now, I was just wondering, from all your research and interviews, was it common practice? Did you hear that this was an approach by Boko Haram to get brides by sacking villages during weddings?
Okay, it wasn't an approach, you know. The thing about Chibok, for example, weddings take place in Chibok in April and December because that's when there is no farming. So a lot of the Chibok girls who were kidnapped had attended a wedding the day before they were kidnapped. Most of them 2 days before they were kidnapped. One girl was married shortly before she was kidnapped. So when Boko Haram attacks, they're not like Lagos people who might have a wedding only on a Saturday or on a Sunday. So it wasn't like their plan to attack weddings, but sometimes they come into a community at during that wedding season, and so many weddings were actually disrupted. So I found when I started covering the story, I found that when I was talking to people, almost everybody would tell me, okay, where were you when you heard your daughter was kidnapped? I was coming back from my sister's wedding. I was coming back from my uncle. Everybody was doing a wedding or something. So I had to ask, and they said, okay, that's the season of weddings. And then, of course, if Boko Haram is attacking at that time, they'll disrupt a lot of weddings. So it was very common to disrupt weddings. So it's not that they were taking the women intentionally and giving us brides. Another misconception people have is that Boko Haram intentionally went to the Chibok school to kidnap the girls because they don't want education. How many of us have heard that narrative? But it wasn't true. They were actually just looking for food. They were out, looking for food to steal. And they went to the girls' dormitory, food and something else, something called an engine block, whatever it means. But there was some construction work going on the school. So Boko Haram was going for the food in their food store, the kitchen, and then that machine. So they got there and the machine wasn't there. And they gathered all the food in the store and packed in their van. And then they saw the girls. They locked all the girls in a room, in one dormitory, and they had an argument. One of them said, what do we do with the girls? Somebody said, in fact, the girl said, one small boy said, let us burn all of them. Let's set them on fire. Somebody else said, no, let's take them out and lead them to their parents' homes and use the girls to access their parents' home and steal some more. Somebody else said, they had an argument. And then somebody said, let's take them to Shekau. He'll know what to do. And that's what led to the Chibok, the media, whatever that became Chibok. So it was accidental. So we hear all these things, wedding, and then people think they're attacking weddings intentionally. We hear taking girls from schools and they think they're attacking girls' education, but it was completely accidental that they found those girls in their school and took them into the forest. In fact, from all the options the Boko Haram members discussed that night, taking them to the forest was actually the most lenient. They were going to set them on fire in that dormitory.
Okay, so we'll take one more question. We only have time for one more question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so my question is for Sulaiman. From your book reading today and the book in itself, it looks that you're someone who is very self-aware and has a lot of consciousness about yourself and your expressions and your internal thought. This is something that a lot of Africans are not used to. It's becoming an evolving experience.
Sorry, I can't hear you, sorry.
Okay. From your conversation today and your book reading, it is obvious that you're someone who is very, very self-aware and someone who is very conscious of your internal workings and very confident in your expressions, right? So, which is not something that is very, very, very obvious around Africa. It's like an emerging experience. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. They heard you, so that they were shocked. They heard you. We've been hearing you.
Let me stand. Okay. So from your conversation,
we heard the preface.
Okay. So it's
yeah, we heard your preface.
I didn't hear the last part. Sorry, because people were
okay.
Yeah.
Let me just go straight to the question, right? Okay. Let me just go straight to the question. Yeah. So, are you very, very intentional about ensuring that a lot of people are more conscious about themselves and their experiences. Is that something you were trying to push with your book?
Am I self-conscious?
No.
So are you very intentional about pushing consciousness, self-consciousness, being self-aware?
I'm aware that when I started the book, the difficulties for me with writing the book, for example, a character like Jamal, was that I was aware that I was becoming extremely judgmental of my characters. And so, I stopped writing, for a year or two, and I started to liberate myself, the process of what I call, breaking the boundaries between the conscious and the subconscious, and meaning I wanted to get to a point where actually I could open the door of my imagination and work with all the characters. So yes, I was very conscious that as a writer, I wasn't at the stage where I wanted to be. And so I was conscious that I really needed to work on myself, not on the skills of writing, because I had that already. But I think it's really important to know that if you're gonna write all characters, those characters, that we don't usually pay attention to, like Jamal, for example, who's got specific sexual ideas, sexual fantasies, then I have to turn myself into a country in the way that we all live in this country, and I think, I was conscious about that, and I was conscious about breaking the boundaries, but also I was conscious about losing myself, because it was very important to me to lose myself and find it with my characters. I don't know if I'm making sense or I'm talking cliche, but I think I honestly mean it. I'm extremely intense writer. I forget the world, and the world forgets me too. So, which is great, And I think, so this idea of consciousness and self-consciousness, I became aware of it because I wasn't the writer I wanted to be. I don't know if I was.
Actually have time for one more question.
Hi everyone, my name is Sin. Sin is spelled S-Y-N. I run Sin City NG. My question is to Adaobi. Hi, Chike. My question is to Adaobi. Did you become sympathetic to the members of Boko Haram? Because from the way you've been speaking, you've been kind of defending them. I know there are always two sides to a story, yeah? But I don't know, what happened to you? Did they... That's my question.
You know what? Sin, thank you for that question. Two things. Somebody had earlier asked me about my attitude was Muslim, because I'm a committed Christian. But when some people have accused me of being sympathetic towards Muslims in my book, and they said, how can you reconcile that? I've had that question a number of times. So people have even sent me emails. I was being an apologist for Islam. Well, the thing is that you go into a story not with preconception. I mean, I just like you, I thought they were all devils with horns on their heads, and, all the women were kidnapped. But I went in, and then I thought Boko Haram was Islam. It was Islamic. I went in, and I was hearing something different. First of all, there is no relationship between Boko Haram and Islam. And I tried to make that very clear in my book, which has upset some people as well, especially, people who there's no relationship at all. And when the Boko Haram members are, captured by the military, some of them go through a de-radicalization process while they're in prison to rehabilitate them. And part of that process actually includes getting imams to show them that what they were taught was Islamic, the killing and the violence and all that is not Islamic. So that's part of the radicalization process. And so the point I'm making is that you go in not knowing what you will hear. Now, when I've interviewed former Boko Haram members, I'll say that. And it's not that I'm sympathetic, but we've had too much of the extreme. They're all devils. They're all rapists. But the thing is that when you get into the real story, it's not the case, and it's my responsibility to tell the story that I saw. And bearing in mind that most of these people you regard as Boko Haram members today that the military is after and wanted to arrest or bomb and arrest were kidnapped as young boys, the same way the girls were kidnapped from their school. These boys were kidnapped from their schools, from their homes, and then taken into Boko Haram, and they became members. Now imagine your 5-year-old brother, your 6-year-old. In fact, there's some families I've interviewed in the northeast of Nigeria. There are no male members of their families anymore. All of them were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and even when the women were rescued, how many times have you heard the military talking about rescuing men? It's usually the women, because the men are conscripted and they become members of Boko Haram. So you cannot go into the story. I'm not talking about coming with a team of white journalists and cameramen and doing a story for one day and disappearing. I've been into part of this story, and I've seen the stories that you don't read on the headlines, and I've seen that many of these Boko Haram members were compelled to join. Many of them have never read the Quran. Many of them have no idea what the Quran says. So it's not Islam. Many of them are just indoctrinated people that were forced to join. And then, as I said, they have these policies because we hear of the rapes. You've heard all the bad stories about them. So when I go in and I see a story that is different from what I've heard, it's my responsibility to tell it, to balance all the negatives. I mean, we all know them as rapists. Everything you read on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and all that. Well, the Wall Street Journal did an article on the boys who were kidnapped, but all are the negatives. So when I come upon those stories that are not quite what I'm hearing, remember I talked about my work focuses on the underreported. I want to get those stories that nobody else is getting. And so I saw that Boko Haram is not what we thought it was. And until we really understand what it is, we can't operate it. We can't deal with it. So it's my responsibility to present a full understanding of this group through my stories. And that's what I did.
We have come to the end of the session.